I really thought after Sony's last failed attempt and their recent successful team-up with Marvel, no pun intended, that the days of Sony attempting to build their own standalone Spider-Man cinematic movie universe was over. Sony's rush to get the Sinister Six in the mix during the second attempt at an Andrew Garfield-led Spider-Man movie seemed to make these plans implode on themselves. Yes! And yet here we find ourselves again, 4 years later, the lessons of the past not learned as we go into what should be the launch of Sony's latest attempt at a Spider-Man universe, albeit this time as a spin-off of the MCU, or as Amy Pastel of Sony has put it, as an adjunct to the MCU, allegedly existing in the same universe or continuity or reality. To be honest with you, I've never heard the word adjunct until the Spider-Man thing came up. The desire to have Venom, and by association their Spider-Man universe, be part of the MCU explains why Sony moved to have the Venom movie put out as a PG-13 film instead of a hard R in the vein of Logan and Deadpool, and as fans of the comic had hoped. Based on the rating, I had decided not to go. I was already on the fence after that first teaser and hearing Tom Hardy's voice. I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting Eddie Brock to sound like.
When I become Venom once more, we will destroy Spider-Man.
But it wasn't a nasally hipster from New York. Then I heard about Lady Gaga's little monster fanbase flooding the internet with crap reviews of Venom, get people to go see her new movie, and I paused to laugh. I mean, honestly? Really? It's not like these two movies have a similar fan base unless you count their protagonist's sense of dress fashion. Slimy meat. Then I thought, perhaps this is actually some coordinated effort on Sony's behalf to motivate Venom fans that might otherwise consider passing on seeing the Venom movie in theaters, but would not want to give box office ground to Lady Gaga, and now instead opt to spend their money and time to go see a movie they know in their little nerd hearts is going to be bad. And that's how I found myself at my local theater for the first showing at the early bird discount, because I'd be down if I was going to spend more of my hard-earned money than I needed to see a movie that I knew in my little nerd heart was going to be bad. I'm a fully grown adult, or so I've been told repeatedly by the attendants who wouldn't let me into Disneyland when I show up in a full costume on Halloween. And as an adult, I have the capacity to decide for myself what is and is not a hot mess of a movie. So, without spoiling anything, was it any good? I mean, yes? I enjoyed it. There's a lot you can do with PG-13. But there were problems. The CG could definitely have benefited from either a larger budget or more time to work on the textures. Nowhere near the level of Superman's mustache, but the scene in the CAT scan was just about as bad in the finished movie as it was in the trailer. Like someone had layered an image of Venom over Tom Hardy's face, set the transparency to 50% while also adding a blur effect. Which is really a shame when you have other moments in the film where he looks like this and the effects are more blended into the actor. I think it's been firmly established at this point that Riz Ahmed, who I'm a fan of from Rogue One and Nightcrawler, is not playing Cletus Cassidy, and as a result will not be Carnage, and I can't help but think that this is a missed opportunity. On par with almost having Chris Hemsworth as Kirk instead of Chris Pine. And if you've been following the casting news around Venom at all, then you probably know Woody Harrelson was cast in the film a while back, and he appears in the post-credits scene in a terrible Ronald McDonald clown wig. I don't think this is a spoiler so much as a warning. It's a setup straight out of Silence of the Lambs, and I can't take a moment of it seriously. There definitely did need to be a romantic plotline past the initial opening scenes to establish Tom Hardy's character as a dedicated to the truth reporter type, a personality trait he almost immediately drops after the opening when he sabotages his own life. Stick with me here because this is a sticking point for me. At no point is anyone besides Eddie responsible for Eddie's life sucking. He screws over his own fiancée. He screws over his boss. He gives up reporting of his own accord. He's a straight-up dick to Carlton Drake, instead of trying to work an angle with the info he's got. And to reiterate my original point here, Drake doesn't do anything bad to Eddie besides firing his fiancée that happens to work for him. And that's not a dick move, that's just practical business sense. One of your lawyers who deals with sensitive information for your massive company is engaged to an investigative reporter and has already leaked some information to them, intentional or not. You fire their ass. And I know Anne is Eddie's ex-wife from the comics and eventually dons a symbiote a couple times before the guilt becomes too much for her, but there is no need to have the character in the movie pass her 4th or 5th scene when it's obvious she has moved on with a successful doctor, a decent guy with no discernible bad qualities, surprisingly not played by James Marsden because I guess he was busy that weekend. Honestly, what's the deal with James Marsden always playing the jilted boyfriend or husband of the love interest? The damn guy just can't seem to catch a break. After Eddie loses his job, I would have expected him to start his own podcast since he apparently has fans, including Anne's new boyfriend. Instead, we get a jump forward in time with Eddie getting drunk in the bar as though he was just fired. I saw headlines leading up to the release of Venom that the movie felt dated, and this was perhaps the thing that most stood out to me. A reflection of the fact that the movie's been trying to get off the ground since I want to say the late 90s? That might explain why Eddie apparently doesn't have an email account and chooses to break into his boss's office to drop off the photos instead of emailing them. Or, you know, texting them from his phone that they're on. And going back to my original point here, if he had his own podcast or website, then he could have just posted those photos himself. And a podcast seems like a natural, organic evolution of the character. Please see the recent Spider-Man game for reference. I feel like this aspect alone dates the movie more than anything else. I could have done with more eating people jokes, maybe a good dead baby joke. The movie touches briefly on Venom's love of chocolate, but doesn't explain why or its connection to eating people's brains. I would have liked it if Venom was more possessive of Eddie, maybe even jealous of his romantic relationships, or at least considered eating Anne's doctor boyfriend. The soundtrack was largely forgettable, same with the score. On the subject of missed setups and opportunities, at the beginning of the film, there's a class of little kids visiting the Life Foundation, being led on a tour by Carlton Drake, the film's big bad guy. And there's this little girl who wants to ask a question, but her classmates silence her. In response to this, Drake asks the little girl to step forward and gives her and her class this inspiring speech about how she shouldn't let anyone silence her and to follow her dreams. It's generally setting up Drake's motivation for the whole movie. The thing is, he doesn't bother to let the little girl ask her question and essentially uses his speech about not letting others silence you to silence her. What the f***? Then later in the movie, when Drake runs in the riot in the body of the little girl from the Malaysian airport, it's in this highly secured area of the Life Foundation, like it's no big deal. I couldn't help but think that this would have made a lot more sense if the little girl carrying Riot's symbiote had entered the Life Foundation building with one of the elementary school groups that we saw touring the building at the beginning of the film. That would have at least explained how she got into the building and passed security without setting off any alarms before she found Carlton Drake. The movie adds this bit about the alien symbiotes needing to find the perfect host, which I get from a narrative perspective to encourage the symbiote to try to find and bond with Eddie. But then why was it able to bond with a dog and then Anne without killing either of them? Well, maybe it killed the dog. This extends to Riot, who was able to find and bond with several hosts throughout Malaysia, including an old woman that he was able to stay in for 6 months. Yet the other symbiotes in Drake's lab struggle to even find one compatible host. And maybe this is just me, but as an alien entity capable of complex thought, wouldn't you want a docile host that you can completely control? That seems to be the case with Riot, controlling the host and having it do his bidding up until his bonding at the end of the film with Drake when they share control. And if the Venom symbiote is slowly killing Eddie, which is stated halfway through the film, why does Eddie suddenly seem okay with Venom at the end of the movie? I feel like there's a plot beat here that we're missing. The movie ends on a threat to the whole world that lets you know that there's no way the bad guys can win, because there's supposed to be other movies in this universe and of course the inevitable sequel. This is all really annoying given the fact that Sony just put out Spider-Man Homecoming, which had the final battle focused on the villain stealing some tech for himself from a plane transport, a small isolated incident that wouldn't have caused the end of the world if the hero failed, and gave the viewer the impression that maybe, just maybe, the bad guy might actually win this time. As a fan of the character, I really enjoyed the movie. I'd like to give it a 3, but the CGI kind of prevents me from really doing that. Plus, there's a few points in there which I've already said earlier, including a major plot point with the phone. I'd given him a 2, but this would be the 3rd movie in a row I'd be giving a 2. And if I had known that was going to be the case, I would have given Bright a 1. And I would like to retroactively go back and change my rating from Bright from 2 to 1, but just moving forward, I think I'll just try to state my reasons and be more discerning as to why I'm rating them a certain way. Well, I think I'm done.